big pleasure for me to be here. Last year I joined CPDP online. So the last time I was here on stage was in January 2020, when I heard on the news that there's some strange virus in China. And I thought, what can happen? So now I'm really glad to be back here in person to meet all of you. And it's even more of a pleasure because I have the chance to moderate this great panel titled, Does the Computer Know I'm a Child? Protecting Child Rights in an Age of Algorithms. This is an important topic. So I'm a project manager at the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. At the agency, we have a work strand where we focus explicitly on new technologies, artificial intelligence, algorithms, and the like, and looked into generic fundamental rights issues. And obviously, as you know, the use of AI involves a lot of fundamental rights issues, including the right to privacy, data protection, non-discrimination, the right to an effective remedy, and so forth and so forth. When we interviewed for our report, which was published in 2020 on AI and fundamental rights, users and developers of AI on the awareness of fundamental rights issues, I have to say almost no one mentioned the rights of the child. It was simply not on the radar of developers that child rights may be impacted on by the use of AI. And that's obviously a problem. On the other hand, at the Fundamental Rights Agency, of course, we work a lot on child rights. Ourselves, so we have projects on child-friendly justice, guardianship questions of victims of trafficking, and we also have a handbook on European law relating to the rights of the child, which you can have freely from our website, which gives a good overview of child rights laws in Europe. So with this panel, it's actually also for the Fundamental Rights Agency the first time that we try to put these two areas together. And highlighting the many questions that arise from the use of algorithms especially. So the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and also the Charter of the Fundamental Rights, they have specific requirements for the protection of children on the one hand, but also promote the participation of children. And when we then think about new technologies, the use of algorithms, we know that the well-being of children is put at a specific risk. There are a lot of questions like how addictive are new tools, how well can algorithms detect children, and would this create a harm to the children? On the other hand, we have important legislation that tackles the use of algorithms. Of course, we have the GDPR. It has a lot of provisions. It also puts a special focus on children. We have the Digital Services Act in place, which also has a provisions that highlight child rights especially. And lastly, as all of you know, the EU is working on the AI Act, and this should also help protecting fundamental rights to some extent. However, there are a lot of open questions. So it is really my pleasure to welcome the panelists. As you can see, we are still a little diminished panel here. We plan to have 5 great speakers. With one who got sick, unfortunately, Carolien Michielsen got sick and cannot join. Luca Tosoni from the Norwegian Data Protection Authority is on his way, so I really hope he will make it throughout the panel, and I will give him the floor at last. However, that doesn't matter because I still have great speakers here, and then we just have more time to discuss. And I would really like, in the first round of introductions, to tackle the very topic of the use of algorithms, how they impact on children, and what are unsolved issues, and how we can solve them with existing and potentially developing legislation. Luckily, I see Luca coming on stage on time, so at least we have the standard 4 speakers. Welcome. Okay, so the panel is a very nice mixture. We have civil society, we have business, we have research and public administration represented. And I would like to ask Leanda Barrington-Leach, who is the Director of International Advocacy at the 5 Rights Foundations, to give a first overview of the issues at hand in around 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. So my name is indeed Leanda. I work at Five Rights. Five Rights is an NGO with the mission to build the digital world that children and young people deserve. As an organization, what we do is we work very closely with children. We do our own research. We work also with IT practitioners on technical standards. And in particular, we provide expert support to regulators around the world. We're particularly known for our work on children's data protection and the age-appropriate design code, which we worked on with the ICO in the UK under GDPR, is now enshrined in law not only in the UK but also in California and is being considered by other countries around the world. So I would like to dive right into our topic today by noting how interesting the title of this session is. So first, there's a question. Does the computer know I am a child? So the fact that we consider that it's important whether or not the digital environment even recognizes children is significant in itself. Because the internet, as we know it today, has been developed on the premise that all users are equal. The flip side of this promise of a new democracy in the digital environment is that all users are equal, as in they are all treated as adults. So when age is formally noted, it's rarely the age of majority, and it's often the famous checkbox of the age of 13. Then the question is indeed in the first person, does the computer know I am a child? So it's recognizing the centrality of the experience of the child herself and her right to be heard. Unfortunately, although a full third of internet users, 1 in 3, are children, their experience and their views are very much understudied and rarely taken into account. The next sentence, protecting child rights. So it speaks indeed of protecting child rights. So and this is not a concept that anyone in this field for more than a couple of years takes for granted. As former Google CEO Eric Schmidt put it, for example, the online world is not truly bound by terrestrial laws. So the concept of our rights applying in the digital environment is not necessarily all that obvious. And finally, it provides the context of the age of algorithms, noting the centrality of AI to the modern lived experience. So this certainly cannot be denied from games, education technology, search, social media recommender systems, and chatbots. Artificial intelligence underpins all the main digital products and services that children use, increasingly mediating every aspect of their lives and influencing their development. So all in all, it's an excellent title, David, well done. And so now I think I'd like to dive a little bit more into some of the issues that lie behind it, and then look at some of the principles that can help guide us as we move forward and discuss legislation. So, do they know I am a child? Last year, Five Rights published our first Pathways research, showing that accounts registered as children were being targeted with material that no business should recommend to a child. Emaciated bodies, violent misogynistic pornography, razor blades, and gaping wounds, and even a message saying, end it all. And sadly, some do. At the same time, these accounts were targeted with ads for games, sweets, teenage tampons, and such like specifically for kids. The sector's enormous wealth is predicated on having detailed knowledge of its users. As one child put it to us, how do they know I like red Nike trainers, but they don't know that I'm 12? The answer is that it is very convenient to know that a child likes Nike trainers because that drives advertising revenue. However, it is inconvenient to know that he is 12, because if you know that, why on earth is your algorithm recommending his profile to strangers, recommending him dating apps or extreme content, or sending him messages that suggest that he kill himself? Our latest research shows how it takes just one click for a child to go for a search for slime. It's like a Play-Doh-like substance for those of you lucky enough not to have it in the house. In one click from slime, searching for slime, to pornographic content, and less than 15 clicks to go from a search for trampolining to eating disorder content and self-harm. The impact is at scale. I'll just give you a few stats. 40% of teenagers say images on social media cause them to worry about their body image. 25% of girls say TikTok interferes with their sleep daily. In the US, nearly 1 in 4 teenagers seriously considered killing themselves last year, double the number a decade earlier. 90% of girls say they have been sent unwanted explicit material, and 80% say it is common to be put under pressure to provide sexual images of themselves. Cases of child sexual abuse online, mostly with self-generated material from the bedrooms of very young girls, increased by more than 1,000% during the pandemic, with hundreds of thousands of victims affected for life. It does not go away once it's online. So what's going on? On the one hand, you could say we humans, we're far from perfect. And people put a lot of nasty stuff out there, and they do some really bad things. Okay. But the way popular digital products and services are designed make this problem worse. The data economy is an attention economy. It intentionally uses persuasive design to get and keep users online, engaging, sharing, and creating content. This translates into common features such as ubiquitous recommendation algorithms, popularity metrics, nudges, endless scrolls, and constant through-the-night notifications, not to mention massive data sharing and commercial pressure. This system leads to children particularly vulnerable to these psychological techniques being systematically exposed to a wide variety of risks and harms. So in terms of solutions, I said I'd mention some principles. How can we make sure the digital world is one where children can thrive? So here I have 4 principles to put forward. First, we must recognize childhood online. All children have specific rights until they turn 18. A child of 13 is not an adult, and in many ways, older children are at greater risk since younger children access fewer products and services, have greater adult supervision, and spend less time online. All children deserve protection. Second principle, children have existing and established rights which apply online as they do offline. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and in particular its General Comment number 25, set out very clearly how children's rights apply in the digital environment. Among the mandates of the General Comment 25 are, and I cite, that data protection, privacy by design, safety by design, and other regulatory measures ensure that businesses do not target children using techniques designed to prioritize commercial interests over those of the child. And I really recommend reading that text in full because there's a lot of stuff in there. So picking up on that third, safety by design, the digital world is almost entirely privately owned. It is human built. It is a system that can be engineered and optimized for any purpose. So optimizing for growth is a choice. Optimizing for ad revenue is a choice. Optimizing for engagement is a choice. Optimizing for children's safety, or as we currently have it, failing to optimize for children's safety, is a choice also. Safety by design, starting with a risk assessment and then a mitigation strategy, or purposefully designing for the well-being of child users, should be an industry norm. Undoubtedly, there are some sacrifices that might be needed from shareholders or from time to time from frictionless convenience for adult users, but for the most part, it requires the sector to do what it does best, provide a personalized user journey, in this case with the understanding that the user is a child. Child-centered design is very rarely a question of innovation or technology. It is almost always a question of corporate and political will. And my last principle, we should not ask children or parents or teachers to hold the responsibility for badly designed systems. This sector is responsible for 25% of world GDP. But still, there is an idea that young children should be resilient to persuasive design or responsible for navigating its harmful content. And if it's not kids themselves, we talk about educating parents and teachers and asking them to use parental controls and continuously spy on their children. For absolute clarity, of course, children, parents, and teachers should be digitally literate, but that is not instead of creating a digital world that has already been designed with children's rights in mind. So, David, I think my time's up. I will conclude by saying that AI does already play a central role in children's lives and that there are massive opportunities to harness it as a force for good, for education, for play, for free expression, and for exchange. But for this to be true, it does need to be designed with children's rights, interests and well-being front and centre until we have a system in which the safety of children comes before optimisation for profit and growth. We will not have the digital world that children deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leanda. That was exactly on time for the 10 minutes. Thank you for the good opening and highlighting that there are a lot of issues, in fact. Starting from design questions, but also pointing to existing commitments and also the lack of knowledge we actually have, and that you also mentioned the lack of research. And that actually brings me nicely to the next speaker. So it's my pleasure to introduce Emilia Gomez, who is a senior researcher at the European Commission at the Joint Research Center, and is now a team leader at the newly set up Center for Algorithmic Transparency, which also deals with questions linked to the Digital Services Act and also the AI Act. And you also led projects on child rights and AI, one of the few to my knowledge. So the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. Please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David, and thanks a lot to all present here. And thanks for the invitation. It's the first time I'm attending CPDP, and I find it really interesting. I wanted to illustrate a little bit my talk with some slides, and as you asked me to provide a little bit the scientific perspective, I would like to give you a little bit some of insights in, can you hear me well? Yeah, it's okay. Some explanation about the work that we do at the Joint Research Centers on AI and child rights, and also give you a little bit which are the challenges that we see in this area in terms of scientific gaps and that we need to address. So just to introduce to my team, I'm leading an interdisciplinary team of researchers at the Joint Research Center that we are working in this interface between science and policy, and in the context of artificial intelligence, we work a lot into how to map those ethical requirements, for instance, ethical guidelines, into then engineering practices. So all this gap between maybe legal requirements to practically implementing into system, this is the work that we carried out. And during the last year, we have been investigating the impact of AI on our decisions and cognitive and socio-emotional capabilities. And we have tried to get some evidence onto the way we need to also evaluate our systems and also incorporate aspects, as it was mentioned before, into the design of those systems. So, of course, we have been also focusing on children, as they are, as David mentioned, they are already considered in EU policies as a very particular vulnerable group, and that we need to specifically address, and also as we provide scientific and technical support to EU policies, in particular the AI Act and the Digital Services Act, and it was mentioned that there is explicit mention to children. So I wanted to explain you a little bit about the work that we do, and also trying to get some messages from you, and not only based on our work, but also the work of the research community on this field, which is composed by people that are maybe engineers and educators, and also cognitive scientists. So this is really truly an interdisciplinary field. So in our work, we have worked, for instance, in different kind of systems. We had a project on social robots for a while, and we are also working on chatbots now, on conversational agents, and we are also interested in recommender systems in particular, and we are trying to do, as you see in the figure, this kind of four kind of worked. On the one hand, we do some field studies with children, where we try to see what is the how they interact with AI systems, and which kind of which is their perception of those systems, and gather also their opinion and their know-how about the interaction and how the interaction should be designed. We also do also some mapping of existing products that are there in the market, and also scientific studies trying to see which are documented evidence about opportunities and risks of AI for children's rights, and also mitigation measures for those risks. We also work a bit on the evaluation of and the auditing of systems in having children in mind, and try to get some strategies for evaluation. And finally, of course, as our role in the Commission, we do some science for policy work. So this little bit, we try to cover many things. So I just wanted to give you some examples of the things that we found out. For instance, we did several studies. These are with children and with Haro. This is a social robot by Honda Research Institute, and we were part of a consortium. My colleague Vicky Carisi was leading this work. And then we did several studies. For instance, we saw how children interact with a social robot to solve a task. It was the Tower of Hanoi. And then we tried, for instance, 2 conditions. One was like turn taken between the robot and the children, and the other one was like initiated interaction by the child, so the child could just opt out of the interaction with the robot. And we indeed find out that this self-guided interaction was better for learning the task, and we saw the influence on the interaction on the way that children may be learning how to perform a certain task. So this is an example of the work that has been done in the literature on the impact that those systems may have on cognitive development, and also on the dependency on those tools for performing the task in the future. Then this was another where we also observed the impact the system may have on social interaction, not only with the robot, but also with other children. And we saw also how, depending on the design of the robot, for instance, how expressive it was, and also how accurate the robot was designed to be. Then we had different behaviors of the children, and this is the third one we did is also with we interviewed children, and we asked them about their trust in social robots. According to how we design the robot, we also have different results on the trust and how they trust and relate this as a friend or as a computer. Now we're running several studies with chatbots, also in Spain and Italy, to see a little bit. So with those studies, we really realized how important it is to incorporate children also in the design process, and also in the evaluation, and how different designs can really impact their perception and also the trustworthiness of the system. This is also studies that are very expensive, and of course, as you can say, we run our study with 100 children, but I guess doing large scale, because there are also a lot of cultural differences, and this needs to be taken up by the community. So we also do some mapping. So we try to see studies that have been done by other researchers. This was a mapping study we did on recommender systems. There is a community which is called Child Rec. It's the children recommender in the RecSys community, that they have an annual workshop, and then there are different studies, and then we try to map, for instance, which are the opportunities that have been documented. For instance, recommender systems now are used in many applications areas. You see down like information search, video recommendation, music recommendation, learning, smart toys, stories and book recommendation, or social media. And then you see how recommender system provide this agency for self-guided and personalized learning. So we see the use that is being done for those recommender system, and of course this provide the children with accessibility to material that on a large scale, and also it brings some value to and support children's autonomy. However, we also see the risk, because this is about data protection, so I don't have to talk about this here, but also we see the exposure to undesirable content or to advertising. There is some evidence, of course, on dependency on those tools later, as also we saw in robots, that if you learn how to perform a task with a certain tool, then you might become dependent. And also it was mentioned before, the difficulty of parents to monitor, or tutors to monitor children's behavior in this particular context, and the propagation also of certain stereotypes such as gender in this kind of tools. So this mapping allows us also not to only do our studies, but also to see how the research community is addressing and what may Of course, it was reflected the lack of evidence and scientific study, but also the lack of integration among studies. So studies may focus on different tools or different systems. They may have different populations. So it's very difficult to get general conclusions on those studies that can further be developed. So more integration on those studies might be something, and common methodologies that might be something in the future we would like to have. And then finally, and third thing, not the end, I have another one about design and evaluation. We have also do a lot now in chatbots. For instance, you see, we try to apply practically the ethical requirements for trustworthy AI for children, and also the UNICEF recommendations for AI and children, and we try to apply this to a conversational agent. This is the study we are currently doing, and we see, for instance, how transparency needs to be adapted to children in the cognitive stages, and transparency means it's a challenge to adapt them to the age and also to the cultural context of the children. We also see how we should adapt to have age-appropriate behavior of systems, and then, as you say, it's very important to know which kind of children are you dealing for, and also we were trying to have this into practice, into a real study, which is really challenging, trying to see which are the challenges in a practical and also in the practical way and in the auditing field. And finally, of course, we are in the European Commission, so we do some science for policy work, at least to try to get some recommendations for EU policies, and in the way that, of course, the Commission has many ways of providing an open consultation of all policies, but we try to write this report. I think this report was in 2022. So it was an early report where we tried to see what is really an integrated agenda for research and policy that might need to be developed. And maybe some of our conclusions is that there in the study we involved children, we involved also our colleagues from policy DGs in the Commission that also have experience in policy. We involve also researchers in different institutions, try to come with different ideas. And maybe one of the points that I wanted to mention is the strategic and systemic choices of AI. AI has a huge environmental impact, and also children will be the ones that will suffer this environmental impact. So we may need to be strategic in where we deploy those systems and for what. So it's not always needed to use AI in a product, so we need to be more strategic. Another is, as I mentioned, the need for child-friendly transparency measures that might be integrating knowledge we have from education, and then also the need, as said, for comprehensive studies and integrated studies, and finally the need for evaluation of systems from different perspectives, from the perspective of the product, the developer of the product, and the company that has, of course, a business model. And this is the traditional way we have proceeded also in industry setups, but also from the societal point of view, and also from the children's perspective. So this is a bit some of the points I wanted to end with. And finally, I forgot the fifth, is that we cannot say children as a whole. There are different needs between different, it was already mentioned before that teens may have different needs, and also depending on gender and culture context, we may also need to adapt our recommendations. So just to end up, now my team joined the European Center for Algorithmic Transparency, where also we have the opportunity now to support the implementation of the Digital Services Act. And as you may know, the protection of minors has specific relevance. So we hope to also address this, continue this work in this context in the coming years. So thanks a lot. I hope it was not too long. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Emilia. No, that was perfectly on time and very interesting to hear, especially I think doing research involving children is quite interesting to learn how children interact with machines. So far I've only seen adults when they deal with robots and then behave like children actually. So it's even more interesting to see like how really children deal with machines, because they are growing up with machines. So that's really different to the way we all grew up. And so we really lack the knowledge and to understand what I also liked you mentioned, the opportunities of using these technologies. But obviously there are a lot of risks. And so I'm quite excited to hear about the center and see how you will use the DSA with a lot of promising provisions in there in increasing our knowledge and what will come up in the next years to come. As the DSA is new, but as we also all know, it's not, algorithms are not unregulated. Most notably, we have the GDPR. And this way, it's a big pleasure and was really important for us to have someone here representing also a data protection authority. So it's my pleasure to introduce Luca Tosoni, who is a specialist director for the International Affairs section of the Norwegian Data Protection Authority. Welcome to the panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and thank everyone for this very interesting panel. It's my pleasure to be here and share this stage with all of you. And as you say, you know, algorithms and their relationship to children is certainly not unregulated so far, and children are certainly very much at the center of the agenda of DPAs. And as a proof to that, I can tell that I was a couple of minutes late because I was attending an EDPB meeting to discuss children-related issues. So we in the DPA community see children as one of the key areas and responsibilities for us. I can also mention, for example, that in the Nordic countries, this is a particularly important issue to the extent that all the Nordic DPAs, which mean all DPAs from all the Scandinavian countries plus Finland, have decided to set up a specific working group to share insights, experience, and perhaps even work together on joint guidance and maybe even enforcement actions focusing on children and gaming online, which we see as important areas to focus on going forward, where maybe not enough has been done to date. But of course, it's not only in the Nordics that DPAs care about children. The processing of children data is also one of the overarching topics within the Global Privacy Assembly, the GPA, which is the forum where most of the countries with a data protection authority have an opportunity to share views and insights on different topics, and one of them is children's rights and the processing of their data. Also, the EDPB itself is working on guidelines on the processing of children's data. We have made good progress, but indeed this is a pretty difficult area to deal with, also because children are viewed a bit differently across Europe. We do not all share the same views and sometimes the same laws regarding children. So the task is challenging, but the EDPB is working on it. And I think in the exercise of this task, DPAs, I think, are very well aware that algorithms can be used to exploit the vulnerabilities of children. And that's why we tend to set rather high demands on the operators that actually process children's data in terms of transparency, fairness, accuracy, etc. But also we view children not only as individuals to be protected, but also to be empowered. So when drafting guidelines or in our enforcement actions, we also try to view children as individuals that can have views on their own and make sure that their views are taken into account and respected, even in terms of data protection choices. But of course, empowerment can only be realized through knowledge. So we see that it's also important that children are more involved and that they get explained in more detail. What are the risks in terms of privacy about their use of digital services online, and maybe also to understand better, for example, the economic value of the data through explaining and involving them in understanding also how operators and digital platforms really work, and what is the business model real, and how children can contribute or the risk they face by using certain services. So, for example, in Norway, we've also tried to work with schools and create websites that are easy to navigate for children, that explain a bit in simple terms what is data protection, what is privacy, what are the risks online. We do our best, and we've been doing it for quite a while, rather successfully, I would say. But I think more of this is certainly welcome. I should also add that what we need to protect children is not only more effective enforcement and more guidance, but probably also better policies and better laws. The Norwegian government has recently tasked a specific committee of experts to do a bit of a scan of the current landscape of the rules that apply to the protection of children in Norway, but I suppose probably the findings can be shared and are maybe similar in other countries too. And what they found is that these rules are a bit scattered around in the legal system, so there is certainly a need for a better streamline, or a bit maybe connect these rules a bit better and deal with the overlaps to a certain extent. I think what this committee has also proposed is to use tools in addition to standard regulation to deal with children, the protection of children online. For example, I think a very interesting and very Norwegian recommendation that they made was to try and make use of the Norwegian oil fund, which is one of the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world, which owns 1.4%, I think, of all of the listed companies in the world, to use that market power to influence how privacy is put in practice in the business world by, in a way, set specific and strict standards for making investment in companies, also in data protection terms. They've been quite successful at doing that when it comes to slavery, other climate or environmental related issues. And we think that maybe privacy could be another frontier to be explored for this kind of private regulation, so not only a standard type of regulation in these terms. And I think another point that I wanted to make before passing the floor back to you, David, is that another key issue that we face in our daily work as DPAs is that of auditing algorithms. And I think it's interesting and important to hear that there is a lot of research being done in this field. Because at the end of the day, I think it will be difficult for DPAs to really enforce data protection rules and other similar rules without really fully understanding these algorithms. And we need to develop methodologies to do that, and probably we need to work with academia and experts in the field to do that. In Norway, we have a sandbox where we interact also with academia and industry, and I think that's a great opportunity for us to learn about how algorithm functions in practice. But we're still working on it, and we're still a lot of way to cover going forward. But we see that as an interesting and important task for us to focus on, really understanding how to look into the algorithm and not just regulating it in the abstract. I will leave it there for now, but we can certainly discuss all these issues in the Q&A later on. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Luca, for this great insights from DPA, but also from the Nordic perspective, and great to hear about also this mapping of child right-related issues across different laws. This scatteredness is also sort of my impression, but good to hear from someone who looked into it more closely. Also interesting to hear about importance of future work. the way to explain issues to children. That's an important one. Being a father of 3, 9, 11, and 13, it is my daily business trying to explain privacy issues. It's really hard, but also successful in some aspects. So that was good to hear. A panel on children wouldn't be and technology full without getting the perspective of the private sector. So it's my great pleasure to also have Cecilia Alvarez on the panel. You are a privacy policy director at Meta. And you have 10 minutes, and I'm curious to hear how you approach the topic of child rights on the platforms.
Thank you very much for having invited me to participate in the panel. It is true that I represent apparently the private sector, but probably I will try to do my best first to share with you the experience that I have in the field before coming to Meta and at Meta. But definitely I cannot speak with respect to every practice that may exist with respect to the private sector, because each of the experiences are different and the kind of tools and approaches as well. So let me start with the approach at Meta that I think has at least some sense for me with respect also to the legal foundation. The human rights, the United Nations Convention of the Right of the Children has been mentioned. And this is the starting point for the approach that is taken at Meta. If we read this convention, we find 3 main concepts that are particularly relevant in how this has been implemented. One is a set of the fundamental rights in the positive sense, in the sense of how we exercise the freedom of expression, of the freedom of reunion, even the right to play in the case of the children, and many others that we found also in the Charter of Fundamental Rights for adults as well, except the right to play. But this is one part. There is another part that goes into the risk or a certain number of elements that we expect governments first as the first addressees of the convention, but this doesn't mean that the private sector should not be looking at this very thoroughly with respect to harms that need to be particularly looked at when we think about children. And we find probably the most horrible ones with respect to violence and sexual exploitation and many, many others. And then we have a third element that does not deserve that many articles as the other two, but are very important, which is also the role of the parents in both dimensions. One in helping their children in exercising their rights, in this element that now we call empowerment, but also in the element of how to accompany the children regarding this prevention from the harms. And these are 3 elements that I found interesting with respect to how I have seen and how I have participated modestly in one part of my work in these last years in the organization. And this has encompassed an approach that is not only focused on a single discipline. As you mentioned before, when we map all the kind of legislation that exists regarding children, it comes from very different angles, not necessarily all well connected, but we can see that we have definitely privacy, the GDPR. It doesn't have only one provision really mentioning children, which doesn't mean that other principles are not relevant for this space. But this is an area. But there are areas as well regarding media sector, regarding content in particular. And that's why we have classification, for example, of games or movies regarding the classification of age. And we have other kind of more broad principles regarding the development of the child, not necessarily very well identified with concrete measures. But these are coming from very different angles. And this is the way in which we have been trying to address this, not putting all the assets, let's say, in one single discipline, but taking 3 in particular. One is safety, the other one is well-being, and the third one is privacy. It's not that there is an order of preference per se, how I have identified them, but the 3 of them need to work together, or at least this is what we have tried to do. Let me ask, apparently if I say, please put a slide, this is going to happen, so I will ask someone who is listening, I hope so, voila. So this slide tries to illustrate this holistic approach in very different angles that the organization has been developing in the last years, and in particular, I would say the last 2 or 3 that I have been witnessing have been particularly intense in the kind of measures that have been developed, but some others were from the start. They are measures that are related to specifically to any kind of user, so irrespective of the age of the users, and therefore this establishes what is called sometimes a floor of protection. And some of the measures are really specific with respect to the minors that are in the platform. So I will start, I cannot explain everything because there are many things and these are just examples, but to give you a flavor of the different perspectives in which these measures are adopted. Let me start as the clockwise by service restrictions. As some of you may know, there is one maybe that is not mentioned here but is relevant because we need always to define the audience. It's not the same thing to imagine the kind of design that you are going to make with respect to an audience that you expect to be 8 years old as opposed to 13 years old, as opposed to 16 years old. And this is something that is relevant. In the case of Facebook and Instagram, which is those that I will probably focus more because it's probably services that you in particular could be more familiar with, the minimum age for the design of the platforms is 13. So when we think about the measures, we are thinking between 13 and 18 as the definition of what a children or a minor in this case would be. In these service restrictions, apart from the fact that you have, let's say, a contract that gives some indication regarding what is the design for, we have the community standards. And these community standards are extremely important. The community standards are something that are the rules that the platform puts in place with respect to the kind of behaviors that you do not want to have in the platform. And these are safety measures. The kind of behaviors that are identified in these community standards refer to behaviors such as, I would not say, well, graphic violence that you have here, self-harm, glorification of suicide, bullying, hate speech. And there is one that I will not necessarily mention this as a behavior per se, but nudity and pornography is also part of these community standards. It's probably of a different category than digital violence with respect to behaviors, but there has been a conscious and an intentional approach with respect to not have this kind of contents in the platform. And how does it work? It's not only that it's a paper that exists and say these are the kind of things that we do not want to have in the platform, but this is when we have the role of the algorithm. So algorithms are not only here to recommend contents, algorithms are also here in order to enforce, in this case, community standards, in order to protect through safety measures any kind of user. So irrespective of the age of the user, these community standards are going to operate in any kind of content. The content that could be organic in the sense of the kind of things that users may post in order to share with others, but also with respect to the paid content, that is the advertising, that you have advertisers who are paying in order to have their ads actually distributed in the platform according to the system that we have in place. Let me pick another example regarding transparency and education. It is definitely not I think a good idea just to blame either parents or to blame children or to blame platforms or to blame one single actor. What I'm trying to say is that this is a work for everyone here. And in order for us to also be able to navigate better, we need also to have a better education in this respect. And there are many ways in which the organization tries to provide information regarding the safety features that exist in the platform, the privacy features that exist in the platform, and also like a kind of healthy way to navigate in the platform, addressed to different kind of audiences. General users, but parents as well, educators, and children as well. And this is made not only through a privacy policy that with all the love that I have for GDPR and our privacy policies, they are not necessarily the best way to provide, I think, this kind of information. There is information there, but there are other ways to provide. There are a youth portal, there is a parents portal, there is an Instagram guide, there are videos of 20 seconds regarding very specific safety issues. Some of them that are actually the actors that are there are young people, because in the research that we have been undertaking, sometimes it is much better to have someone young speaking to another younger audience than not necessarily to have an adult. Even though I learned certain things that I would like to share with you later regarding consultation with young people in this respect. Let me take safeguards also as another topic. Here we can find a myriad of very different measures that could be the privacy and safety by default settings. So when a young person, so an under 18, is opening an account in Facebook and Instagram, this is private by default. You have the take a break, which is maybe another one that is more looking at the well-being side, that you have when a young person is for a long time navigating in our platforms, they are going to receive a prompt. And also there is what we call a topic nudge in order to propose 9 other topics in order that you are not repetitively maybe only looking at a single topic. There is another measure that has been taken, which is we have been funding with NECMEC a platform in order to, which is named Take It Down, in order to identify, in this case, nudes and child exploitation, because it goes really to very horrible things that could be shared by different actors in order to be able to take them out from the public spheres and unencrypted spheres. We have parental supervision, also measures that can be initiated by the teen and can be initiated by the parent as well. And this is something that has been also the result of a co-consultation with parents and children regarding very different areas, in particular with respect to when a teen could be blocking someone, which is another kind of feature that also exists. Let me go very quickly, because I have 1 minute, with respect to the ad restrictions and the understanding user age. With respect to the ad restrictions, there is something that is an important measure that the organization took now 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years now. That is that behavioral advertising is not served to under 18. So when an advertiser goes to the platform and identifies that they want to have as an audience under 18, then the only thing that they can identify is actually the age and the location in the sense of the country in order to be able to identify age restriction things that could exist, such as alcohol or any others. But behavioral advertising, that was something that was existing before, is not something that is available for advertisers any longer. There are many other measures that are taken in ads, but let me move super quickly to the understanding user age, because the algorithm also plays a role as well. There are a certain number of features or services that are available in the platform that are associated or that we believe could be more risky for younger adults, in which case we are applying other kind of age assurance mechanisms in addition, let's say, to the entry point. One of these is based on AI with respect to the behavior of children. So when I think one of the questions is whether you can know the interest but you do not know the age, it's not that easy. We know the interest even though this is not informing the ad system. For the age, it is something that is difficult, but there are systems that are improving more and more. They are better in the 18 years old, for very important reasons also linked to how GDPR is implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this overview. I fully understand that 10 minutes are not enough for a topic like this for each of you. So I thank everyone to sort of staying within the time frame. I'm aware of the time as well, and we need to leave some time also for the audience to ask questions. I would still like to have another very quick round to follow up and let you actually react to each other, keeping in mind the questions we also have for this panel. I mean, I hear a lot of important differences, like also that the children are, but that within children, the age difference is also a relevant aspect. We also heard that like privacy is and data protection law is one aspect, but there are more laws, and that's interesting how to apply. So if I ask you for another quick round to select one point that you think is relevant when potentially using algorithms on children, what needs to be done to better enforce existing laws, or what needs to be done to create new laws? Is there a need for more action from policy side? I just go around through and kindly ask you for a quick reaction. I know it's a difficult question, but then we also have time for the audience. So Leanda, maybe you want to react first.
Thank you. So indeed, there are lots of laws in place, but as you said, I think right at the beginning as well, a lot of them are not really interpreted together with children's rights. So children's rights and digital policymakers, they don't really go together. Luca maybe being an exception. So I think it's not a question of new laws. It very much is a question of enforcing what we have and making sure that we enforce it based on the rights that exist. I do think that actually the fact that we keep splitting everything, the more different laws, different regulators, different ethical principles, the more you have, the more, it ends up so that the house always wins in the end. The more complicated you make it, the more problematic it is. I think in a certain sense, we need to go back to basics and stop making all these kind of long lists of things and checklist approaches and just say, it's about the rights are set out there, and it has to be a question of due diligence, and the burden does need to be on the providers, whether commercial or not, to prove that they are doing their homework and not in breach of children's rights, and not the other way around. If it's always about proving harm, I think many of the things that we have heard today also show how difficult it is to prove that, for example, there's a systemic breach that this specific child, this specific child experienced a significant level of harm or damage, that it was systemic, et cetera, et cetera. It's very difficult to implement that way.
Okay, thank you. For this point, I just hurry on for the sake of time. So Emilia, if you have one point in view of legislation.
Yeah, maybe one point I wanted to make is the need to have more standard safety measures for AI and children's rights. I think at the moment, maybe at least there is the legal requirements that are also they're challenging also to implement, and there's some safety standard, but it's difficult to find evidence on the real world application. So I think maybe because I'm an engineer, so more from a practical perspective, we also need safety measures that can be really actuable and implementable, and that are proved. So this is maybe the point I wanted to mention. It. I mean, we see industries having some measures also from, there is a requirement, the legal requirements that are being developed, and also there is the policy need. But all is very complex, so I would say having very set of practical measures for safety and children's rights might be operationalizing this need in the products. But I think this will come in the next years. I'm positive for that. Yeah.
Sounds good. Like hearing back to basics, back to human rights approach as we have them in combination with new standards. Sounds like a good way forward. Luca, if you have any reactions.
Yes, thank you. Maybe two quick remarks, because you were asking us about what can be done to improve the enforcement side and also for having better policies. I think on the enforcement side, this issue we have flagged today, that there are several rules that can come into play when dealing with children, certainly create additional problems from an enforcement perspective, because different authorities might be competent for enforcing different issues. They might not always have the same views on how these rules are to be read and so forth. I mean, we see it on a smaller scale, let's say, when we deal with GDPR and e-privacy, which, as you know, in some countries fall under the competence of different authorities. If we're dealing about children, this effect can be multiplied. So I think we need to work on streamlining maybe the enforcement process or create ways for better cooperation across different regulatory areas that are of interest to children. Even within a single regulatory area like data protection would be good to streamline the enforcement process, and there is big hope in this reform that the European Commission is working on to try and maybe improve a bit, for example, the way data protection authorities do work together within the European regulatory framework. And on the policy side, I think what's important is that, in a way, the children aspect or children are in the mind of the regulator in each of the areas where children might be affected by the regulation. And I think a good example of that could be, for example, the upcoming Cyber Resilience Act. We were talking about social robots, for example, and we probably remember this horrible example of this Kyla doll that was discovered to have major security flaws and could be used to basically monitor children, by threat actors. I think we have to keep that in mind when we think about devices that are in common use in households and that children can come in contact with, to make sure that there is also that level of safety and that children are also covered on that front. And then I think I would emphasize once again the importance of auditing. I think that's really a key issue. I don't know if it's something can be worked on from a legal standpoint, but certainly from a policy standpoint. I think there is a need for methodology, standards you were talking about. I think I would very much agree that more standards are to be very much welcome in this area, also in the interest of children's protection.
Thank you very much. Cecilia, may I ask you also to address these questions? I mean, you had these points also in your presentation, but maybe one sentence before we are still open for questions from the audience.
Thank you very much. I will go with an example to make the thing, I think, more concrete, or at least it has helped me. I will take the thing that is very important to identify what are the goals that you want to achieve in order to choose the right tool. Let's take that one goal that is quite common in many legislations is to avoid that young people may access to pornography. This is not a data protection issue per se, it's a safety issue. There could be different ways in which you are going to be able to attain this goal. One could be age assurance. We may say, we put an age assurance gate, and therefore, when there is pornography, there is a no access, let's say, to this content. This could be one way. There could be other ways. Let me take two examples. What we have done with the community standards does not require age assurance to be effective. So how it works is what we take is pornography is out from the kind of contents that you can access. So the place in which you are going to put your algorithm is in order to enforce properly your community standards. The algorithm that doesn't work alone. It works also with reports of users and with human review in certain aspects. But what I'm telling you is that age assurance, to take something that is very common that we discuss, is not necessarily always either the best one or the only one. Let's imagine that we take age assurance for the sake of the example. If we want to have age assurance with respect to a goal that is particularly risky, we need, I think, to think that we want to have a measure that has a great degree of efficacy. It works really well. For doing this, probably you will need to have a lot of data in order that this works. If I take the example of the AI behavioral study or analysis in order to identify which age do you have, you need a lot of data in order to have an estimate that you have an efficacy, a degree of efficacy that is appropriate. So you are not going to start with the data minimization thinking that there is a lot of data and that's why you cannot do this. No, you should start by what you want to achieve, this kind of thing can achieve this, and then I assess whether, from a data protection point of view, how I assess this. What I'm saying is that you do not do the things in isolation. Even if we have privacy and safety angles, they need to look at the thing together, because otherwise we end with disparate assessments, and I think that we are not necessarily doing a good job.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that sounds like the importance of assessment and auditing, as we heard, to understand how these systems really work. I'm sorry to almost have failed as a moderator. We still have time, however, and I'm sure there are a few burning questions from the audience. So please, there is one question. I'll try to take maybe 3 questions and then ask the panelists to react. Over there, this one.
Thank you. My name is Simone van der Hof from Leiden University, and I have a question for Emilia and for Cecilia. First question for Emilia is about, well, there's one area where children are actually impacted more and more by AI on a daily basis that also has a big impact on their future, and that is education. And I was wondering to what extent that area has been part of your research, and what are some of the results. And you can also direct me to that research, and I can look at it myself in view of the time. And a question for Cecilia. You've been talking about making sure that the most harmful content is not available on Instagram. So you're not allowed to share it, like nudity or graphic violence. But when we look at the Audio-Video Media Services Directive, and video sharing platforms are now part of it, there is also the harmful content, which is not the most harmful content. And the rule there is that it should not impact on the freedom of information and expression rights of adults, but children should not normally see that kind of content. My question basically is, how are you going to implement it in a way that children are not seeing that kind of content, or are being able to avoid that kind of content? Because we also know that children are actually very upset by content that they don't want to see, and they want to have a choice there. So those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more. There was one more question, please. If someone could hand over pass on the microphone. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Stuart Dresner from Privacy Laws and Business. And a question again for Cecilia. I was interested to hear of all the protections and safeguards Meta's been putting in place. My question is very short. The question is, are all the protections and safeguards which you described apply only to Europe, or does it apply to Meta's work across the world? Because obviously what you're saying is doing a lot of good work that you've explained, but how far does it apply across the whole corporation? Which I was fascinated to hear that internet was a fantastic value of component of international GDP, which was very interesting. Thanks.
Okay, that's one last question. If you could have a quick question, and then I'll see how much time we are allowed to have the speakers to answer.
I'll grab the mic. Hi, my name is Matthias Vermeulen. I'm a director at AWO. Just one quick question. The EU is in the process of adopting an EU age-appropriate design code, and just would want to know from the panelists, like, what do you think, or what do you hope this code would solve actually on top of everything that we already have? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's try to make it in 3 minutes, or hopefully we can have a few more. I'll just go through the round. So Emilia, please, you had a specific question.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I wanted to mention maybe as a pointer that DGAC has published some ethical guidelines for the use of AI and data in education and training. So there is some work around also considerations on the use of AI in the educational process and also in the access to education. So I would say those guidelines might be a starting point for for also other work that has been done at the Commission level, at the GRC level, for instance, on AI competence framework. But I would say these ethical guidelines for the use of AI in data in education and training by the GAC might give you also some pointers to that. And with refers to this new initiative that was mentioned, my feeling is that, as we say, we need to incorporate the children in all initiatives that are now being proposed. And I guess now there are also new legislation are coming that will be, now the challenge is the enforcement part, and then we will see how this impact also this area. So I feel that there might be, I'm not an expert in this particular code, I will need to check, but I feel there is now a moment to reconsider all of them, to integrate all of them, and also to consider children, even if they are not the focus of the policy. So that's my fast reactions.
Thank you, perfect. Leanda, if you may.
Thank you. I'll just answer on the last question. The other two weren't for me. So indeed, the European Commission is working on a voluntary self-regulatory age-appropriate design code, which will be, unlike the ADC that I mentioned, which is an enforceable regulatory code. This is, as I say, voluntary, self-regulatory, and only for, well, it's designed for the very large online platforms. What's really important to understand is that the DSA has provisions for a high level of privacy, safety, and security for all online platforms. And this is not negotiable. So this is not a question of self-regulation or what's voluntary. When you're talking about what's voluntary, based on the Article 34 of the DSA, then you are talking about beyond the basic health and safety, and you're talking about children's rights in general. So the high level of safety, privacy, security, that is set out already in standards. You were talking about the importance of standards. There is a technical standard for age-appropriate design, and that is being worked on now by CENELAC for a European standard. What the Code of Conduct needs to do is look at the empowerment, the positive right, so participation, the right to be heard, the right to play. That kind of thing can indeed be looked at in a voluntary setting.
Thank you. So we should stop now, but we get 1 more minute, I see, the crew. So Cecilia, maybe you can answer in really like 1 minute. Luca kindly agreed to be available afterwards also for further discussions. We have the lunch break right away. There's a FRA booth around the corner, so please continue the discussions. 1 more minute for you.
So very quickly, with respect to the European Code of Conduct, we have expressed our interest to participate in it, and I am really hopeful because in the Big Plus strategy, it is really looked at this kind of holistic approach in which it is not only looking at one single aspect, but we can see that there is interest in addressing age assurance, in addressing parental supervision, in addressing education, so in addressing the different angles that this company has also been already investing and continues to invest in it. So I really believe that is a great initiative to do this way. With respect to whether all of the things that I mentioned and others apply globally, most of them, yes. There are certain things that are starting, let's say, in certain jurisdictions in order to say whether it works before they expand to other jurisdictions. So this is the case of our use of UOT, which is a face detection system that we have for age assurance for certain use cases. It started in the US initially for Instagram in a specific use case, and then this has been expanding, and it is now in Europe, but I cannot tell you that it is in every single country in which the Facebook and Instagram platform operates. But this is the way in which we do this. With respect to the question of Simon van der Hoef, the way in which the directive is being implemented is quite not necessarily exactly the same in each of the countries. So the way in which they are identifying what is considered harmful is something that needs always to be looked at and compared with the community standards that we have. To take one law that is pretty advanced in this, which is not from the European Union, but it has the same kind of logic, which is the Online Safety Bill in the UK, they have a different way of describing what they consider should be removed from the platform, but we can have a classification that it is not exactly the same definition, but you can classify or reclassify the kind of things that we are seeing in the legislation in the community standards that we have right now. But if not, we will change the community standards in order to create the categories that are relevant in order to be able to comply with the law. The enforcement, as I mentioned, is not only a question of AI, that is extremely important and impossible to do it otherwise because there are gazillions of contents that are created every second, and therefore we cannot do this just by human review. But human review is also there because there are cases that are not black and white. And the third thing is the user reports, which is also important. When you are identifying something that you feel that is a discomfort, you can report that this is something according to the categories that this is going to be reviewed by humans. These community standards and the way in which we operate them are actually published, the results, every quarter. They are audited by an external auditor, independent, every year. And we have an oversight board that is composed by independent and experts in human rights that are also reviewing our community standards and the way in which we operate.
Okay. So we stop now, and we take this as an outcome. We are in the middle of the conversation. So there's much more to do on child rights and the use of algorithms, a lot of ongoing actions. I thank everyone for being here. Please join me with a round of applause for the panelists, and I look forward to staying in contact with all of you on this very important topic. Thank you.